Okay, we're ready to start.
Yeah, not just yet. If you will give it just a moment, I'm going to wait until I stop seeing the attendees go up. I just started the live broadcast, and so I don't usually start until it stops going up, and we're still going up in attendees right now.
Okay, perfect.
All right, looks like it has stopped. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jennifer Kirkendall Griffin. I am the General Magistrate in the Third Judicial Circuit. I am also a past chair of the Solo and Small Firm section. I would like to welcome you to the June 23rd, 2021 Wednesday Wisdom, Managing Up, a primer on interfacing with young attorneys. It is going to be course number 4671, and I'll go ahead and share our slide that gives you the course information as well as our section sponsors. Those include our two annual section sponsors, which are Lex Helper and Sandler Training. Our advocate sponsor is Thomson Reuters, and our three section supporters are National Deed Network, Align CPA LLC, and Florida Lawyers Mutual Insurance Company. Our section friend sponsor is Tabs 3. If you're not already familiar with Wednesday Wisdom, it is a free CLE series presented exclusively by the Solo and Small Firm section. You can watch it either live, like the people, everybody right this minute are watching, or you can come back later and watch it in our closed Facebook group. So we have all of our Wednesday Wisdoms archived there. So if you have missed one or you need some more CLE hours to meet your requirements, please go and look through the group, ask to join. But again, it is an exclusive section membership, so only section members of the Solo and Small Firm are able to access the closed group. We have invited and opened this particular presentation to anybody and everybody. So if you're not a member, who doesn't want to save over $500 a year on CLE when you could have it for free? So I invite you, especially at this time of year, to go ahead and join our section and go back and look in our archives for our prior presentations. During the presentation, if you have any questions, please type it in the question and answer. Duriki is going to be our moderator today, so he is going to address those questions. And mentioning Duriki, I'm now going to turn it over to him so he can introduce himself as well as our speakers. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Duriki Gayuka. I'm a corporate associate here in Atlanta with Townsend and Lockett. However, I am an active member of the Florida Bar, and I'm joined by my fellow panelists. We got Brajesh Patel here, who's a senior assistant county attorney with Seminole County, and he also has transactional experience in the private sector with Universal Orlando and Siemens Group. I'm also joined by my good friend and colleague, Zoila Lahara at McFarland Ferguson. And she is a third-year associate in their litigation practice group. She's got a vast array of experience both in state and federal court, and we're happy that she joined us here today. She graduated from Stetson University College of Law. And we also have Ian Dankelman, who's joining us from Freeborn and Peters. And Ian has a very extensive background. He was a federal judicial law clerk for the Honorable Judge Elizabeth Kavakovich, and he's also a graduate of the University of Florida. I think I already said that. And of course, thank you to you all. And we also have a panelist who has pre-recorded her sessions, someone that's very near and dear to us, Professor Alicia Jackson from Stetson University. She's also the Director of Academic Success and Bar Preparation Services, in addition to being a member of the faculty. And particularly, her help here today is important because for the data-driven portion of the presentation, she has done a bunch of research with Building a Better Bar and the Institute for the Advancement of the American Legal System. And some of that research is particularly on point for us today. So without further ado, we're going to start off with a video presentation that Professor Jackson has pre-recorded for us. And then I'm going to ask my panelists to interact with it. So Magistrate Griffin, if you can put up Professor Jackson's first video.
Thank you for joining us today. I am Alicia Jackson, and I am a member of the faculty at the Stetson College of Law and also the new Director for Academic Success and Bar Preparation Services. I am also a proud member of the Florida Bar. I've had the distinct pleasure for over 18 years to teach in a higher education setting, including teaching undergraduates, PhD, and law students. The overwhelming majority of my teaching career has been in legal education. I am a former Associate Dean for Student Learning and Assessment, and I teach a variety of law school courses, including family law, juvenile law, and upper-level Florida and multi-state courses. Our topic, managing up a primer on interfacing with young attorneys, is a topic that is near and dear to me. Engaging with millennials and Gen Z in the context of generation learning theory is a core area of my scholarship, as my interests include education bias, gender and racial equity in education, and generational learning theory. My article, Contemporary Teaching Strategies, Effectively Engaging with Millennials Across the Curriculum, published in 2017, has been downloaded more than 1,000 times in SSRN and also has been cited by other publications. During my presentation today, in part one, I will explore millennials as students, starting with who they are, their previous educational experiences, and how they learn best. In part two, I will discuss millennials as new attorneys. The New York Times article, which depicts millennials as the me generation, led to an onslaught of criticisms, especially from millennials. While millennials are often misunderstood, make no mistake about it, they are an extremely important generation who will shape the world for generations to come. So who are they? They were born between 1980 and 1994. They value relationships with their teachers and superiors. They prioritize tasks instead of time. They are receptive to feedback, expect recognition, and are free thinking and creative. While our discussion today is about millennials, as they represent the lion's share of young attorneys, our focus will soon need to shift to Gen Z, as they currently make up the largest population of new law students and will soon be the next generation of junior lawyers. This will require an additional shift, but certainly understanding millennials is a great place to start, as they share similar characteristics as their young Gen Z counterparts, including how they build relationships, communicate, and leverage technology. An exploration of millennials' previous experiences, like the self-esteem movement, helicopter parents, the internet and technology, and the No Child Left Behind Act, help us to better understand who millennials are and provide support for why millennials learn the way that they do. Starting with the self-esteem movement depicted by the comic strip on the left of the screen, it's really interesting in that the young man in the comic strip decides to incorrectly multiply 62 times 7. His response to his teacher is, "Before you say anything, remember the educational importance of self-esteem." The self-esteem movement has its origins back to the 1980s. It was at a time where there was high anxiety in the business community and among national policymakers over the failure of US students to outpace their international peers. Critics argue that these efforts simply do not work. Self-esteem is not something conferred, it is earned through taking risks and developing skills. Confidence comes from competence. We do not bestow it as a gift. Next, helicopter parents. The term helicopter parenting first entered the American lexicon back in around 1990 or so, and it describes parents who hover over their children. Critics argue that children who experience helicopter parenting often have high anxiety, low self-esteem and confidence, and they have decreased academic performance. The outcry of parents hovering over their children is actually a reflection of the difficult experiences of parents from the previous generation. So they decided when they became parents that they were going to protect their children at all costs. No Child Left Behind. The No Child Left Behind Act is a 2002 update to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and it effectively scaled up the federal role in holding schools accountable for student outcomes. While well-intentioned, there's quite a bit of criticism about the impact of the No Child Left Behind law, as it relied too heavily on standardized tests. The emphasis on math and reading tests, which were administered in grades 3 through 8 and once in high school, narrowed the curriculum, forcing schools to spend less time on subjects that were not explicitly tested, like social studies, history, foreign language, sciences, and the arts. While writing the article, Contemporary Teaching Strategies, we used our own personal experience in legal education, coupled with the multidisciplinary research on the topic of how to most effectively teach and engage with millennials. Millennials learn best where there is quality student to faculty contact, reciprocity and cooperation, active learning, feedback, guidance, respect for diverse talents and ways of knowing, and when faculty set high expectations. In the context of legal education, the American Bar Association, who accredits law schools, have updated the standards for accreditation to include more active learning, feedback, and guidance to law students, from the requirements of minimum experiential learning requirements to formative assessments and meaningful feedback to more advising. The law school landscape has changed, and so has the experience of young lawyers. It is important to note that many of the ABA changes was an outcry from the legal profession for law schools to shift. As well, before the shift, there was a noticeable decline in how millennials were performing in law school and on the bar exam. Next, the panel will discuss their own experiences as millennial lawyers.
Okay. Awesome. All right, that was an awesome presentation by Professor Jackson, and we thank her for it. And I want to jump straight into some questions. A few things that, kind of stuck out to me, especially were the comments about millennials and newer attorneys preferring having quality contact with their superiors. However, in law firms, I'll never forget, at my first job, I got told, listen, we think you can do the work. We wouldn't have hired you if we didn't think you could. We're going to rely on you to do it. And if there's a real question, come ask us. But for the most part, you get it done. And I think that in my personal experience, there's probably a schism sometimes between the type of constant, or maybe not constant, but frequent reinforcement and contact we want with our superiors and what's available to us. So how do you feel about that, Brajesh, if I could start with you?
Well, I think you raise a good point. I think making sure that the new attorney feels comfortable enough. I think this is where the generational gap comes into play. It's the level of or the mindset that you just explained versus newer attorneys, where we're more comfortable with making sure that there's a groundwork in place, there's steps laid out for how things are going to progress in terms of assignments, knowing what to expect, having someone that's open and available for questions, not only for a manager, for example, a managing attorney to come to you and say, hey, let me know if you have any questions, but taking the proactive step and stopping by your office from time to time, sort of building a rapport with you so that you feel comfortable enough to go to them. I think those few reasons I would say would be a couple of the differences.
Perfect. Zoila, I'm going to go to you. I think Brajesh raises a good point. We do typically tend to perform better where we're comfortable. I think, you ever hear athletes talk about, I'm in my zone, I'm in the mood, they are usually excelling at what they do because they prepared for it, they feel comfortable. I like for you to talk a little bit about some suggestions based on your own experience of how law firms can create more comfortable work environments for attorneys.
Absolutely. First of all, I want to thank you, Dariki, for hosting this, for putting it together, and of course, for having each and every one of us here to speak a little bit on the subject. One thing that I read through Professor Jackson's law review article, Contemporary Teaching Strategies, Effectively Engaging Millennials Across the Curriculum, she made a very good point. Millennials now are the largest US population and most college educated and ethnically diverse. That just emphasizes that the one size fits all model doesn't really work with this generation. You have to learn what motivates each individual, what makes them happy to come to work every day. And I understand, the thought that one has to be happy to come to work, right? It's kind of ridiculous to some people, but that's how people best perform. And so to identify, okay, what are these attorneys, what are their skills? Hone in on those skills rather. You know, if they're good researchers or if they're good drafters, right? And we kind of have to be a little bit of everything, but really to know what that person is especially good at, to motivate them and say, you know, that was a really good motion that you put together, not just the criticism, right? But also the emphasizing the good things that they did as well, right? That makes someone comfortable. Having an open door policy and saying, you can stop by my office if you have any questions. It's not just, here's an assignment, do the assignment. I don't want to hear any questions, right? It's really important to make sure that that newer attorney can come to you if they have any concerns, if they're hitting a wall with their research, if they spent too much time going down a rabbit hole and just need to get guidance to get back on track, right? That makes someone comfortable, I feel like. And I think it's something that law firms should promote.
Perfect. And I know that to be true in my own life. I know the supervisors at my firm, I'm always comfortable when I'm able to go into their office and ask them for some redirection, because we do care a lot about our work as newer attorneys. However, we don't have those years of experience that our supervisors do. So we value that. Ian, I'm going to go to you and ask you to respond. I know you've had a variety of different background experiences. You've been with a federal district court judge, you've also been a prosecutor, and you've been with two rather large law firms. What are some tips you could share with employers, especially as you exit the entry-level phase and you're going more into the mid-level, senior level of your career, that make comfortable work environments?
Well, thank you very much, Ricky. I think one of the most important things for early career, just the ink is still wet on your bar card time, is setting some expectations on what the office is looking for, what the management is looking for from you, and how you fit into the larger scheme. So I started my career off as an assistant state attorney in the 4th Judicial Circuit, which is Duval, Clay, and Nassau counties. And the moment I was sworn in, I think they gave me 2 or 3 buckets of files and said, go figure it out. But there was still a camaraderie that happened and an understanding of where I fit in on the team. My job was to do the best I could ethically, doing the right thing, and to seek justice. And there were a lot of mistakes that happened on the way. That'll happen with a 3-week lawyer, but there was still an opportunity to learn, to grow skills, and to ask, just as Zoila said, more experienced attorneys, am I doing the right thing? This isn't a science, it isn't an exact math equation, but is this the just thing? Is this the right thing to do? So I think that open door is really important, especially early on.
Perfect. And you know, going back to the video, another thing we talked about was like the self-esteem movement. And, you know, it's funny to see the cartoons, obviously, but law firms are often touted as tough work environments. And it's not just as we've seen, you know, an exodus of junior bankers on Wall Street leaving their profession. And we know that there's somewhat of a schism in thought sometimes about, you know, whether we have the grit to make it in the profession. But I think positive, constructive feedback is something that helps us understand how to curb mistakes. So, you know, what do you guys think are some ways that you've observed receiving feedback that have helped you kind of cope and grow in a law firm environment? And you can just share one for the interest of time. And I'll start with you this time, Zoila.
Sure. So something that I find incredibly helpful is, and I'm very fortunate to be at a firm where I work with attorneys that do put this into practice. It's not being told what you came up with is wrong, or, you know, having a document just full of red X's. It's really talking through it, right? And understanding why I got that wrong, and how I can do it better next time, how I can be more expedient, how I can head in the right direction, right? Instead of just receiving a no, this is not what we were looking for. It's understanding how I can do it better. And I think that's incredibly helpful. I don't think that's talked about enough, how much really engaging with young, newer attorneys, we tend to be a little righteous at the beginning because we think the law is the law is the law, right? And sometimes it takes that experience, those years of experience, to understand the different dynamics and how a judge, for example, could rule against you when you were so sure that you had the law on your side. And so sometimes it's understanding those extra factors that need to be there for the argument or what have you to be as strong as it can be that we're just missing because we're newer. But when we're not just shut out, but rather explained to or talk through how it can be better, that's certainly helpful going forward.
Perfect. Ian, I'm going to go to you and ask you a similar question. What's a way that you observe, receiving positive feedback from a senior attorney in your firms? How has it helped you out? And we want to obviously give the advice from the perspective of helping, folks that might be starting a firm and looking to bring on their first attorney.
Well, I think the one phrase that really stuck out to me in Professor Jackson's introduction was confidence comes from competence. So when you get that positive feedback, it's nice to know that you're on the right track, even if you're not there, but you're going in the right direction. And that just builds upon itself often and often to where you're disregarding the maybe the insecurities that you have. Am I doing the right thing? To where, okay, I can do this. I can be a bigger part of the team. I can make an impact for my law firm, for my judge, for my office, wherever you end up being. And I think if I could just harken back, that confidence versus confidence, that has a big role with more senior attorneys.
Perfect. And Brajesh, I'm going to end with you, and I want to say something interesting about Brajesh. People might not know this. Brajesh was my predecessor at Pinellas County when I was a county attorney there. And he didn't actually have a session where he gave me feedback and advice, but his notes were so detailed that he left for whoever was going to come in after him, because there was a gap in between when we started, that it really helped me get up on my feet there and be a successful attorney. So thank you for that. And I'm going to go to you with that question. What's a way you've observed that is a successful way to provide feedback and kind of get around this tough environment of a law firm institution?
Well, first, I appreciate the compliment very much. And I appreciate the question as well. I think that there's an art to providing constructive feedback. It's not what you say, but how you say it. Using mistakes as teaching moments and asking questions to allow the attorney to think critically so that they don't make the mistake again, and not harping on the mistake so much or for so long that the attorney feels nervous or afraid on their future assignments, that they continuously start making mistakes. I think all those things you want to try to avoid. Sometimes, as you alluded to the sports reference earlier, I think sometimes you just have to treat it like a basketball or football game where you make a mistake, you learn from it, and you move on to the next play. The one thing that I've reminded myself over time, and I say this based on just my personal experience, is that the practice of law is the main part of practice of law is practicing it. So, you practice every single day to get better at it. You're going to make mistakes. I think managing attorneys have to be understanding of that, but use it as a teaching moment, because it's only going to benefit the firm and them in the end, and the client ultimately.
Perfect. And I have, talking about motivation particularly, I think Zoila said something earlier about we're a very diverse group of people. We're a large group of millennial attorneys, and particularly no one thing motivates us all. So sometimes it's money, let's just be honest. Sometimes it's public praise and adoration. Other times it's the intrinsic gratification of doing something the right way. Or interestingly, it may just be, greater inclusion into your work cohort, being embraced more, as Ian spoke earlier about, the camaraderie in his office. I want each of you to answer this kind of two-part question pretty concisely. But one, what do you think motivates you? And two, what is one way that you've seen your firms or your institutions embrace what motivates you and enhance it at work? And this time I'll start with you, Ian. Those two questions are, what motivates you, and what's one way that any of the institutions you've been with have embraced that and enhanced it?
I think what motivates me specifically is doing a good job and to do right by the client, to right by whoever you're representing as an attorney. And I understand a concise answer was called for, but the step that has enhanced that from, for example, Freeborn and Peters is when you have an opportunity that's bigger than what you previously had. If you keep working hard, you get more and more opportunities to play a bigger impact on your team and on the litigation strategy.
Ooh. And Brajesh, we'll go to you next with that. What's one thing that motivates you? And in your experience, what's something that your legal institutions have done to embrace that motivation and enhance it in your work?
Sure. So I love this question because every place that I've interviewed at, when it's been my turn during the interview to ask questions, this is the question that I ask of the firm or the offices that I've worked at, which is, what motivates you? Because I want to make sure that my values align with the values of the place that I'm going to be working at. For me personally, yes, promotions and raises are, of course, valued and appreciated for the hard work that I put in. But I think my personal motivation is the journey to get better every single day, so that you can provide the best product for your office and ultimately, again, the client. And I say this in a very humble way, but my other motivation is also proving to people that never gave me the opportunity, prove them wrong and to prove them how successful I can be. And so I would pretty much boil it down to that.
Perfect. Zoila, same question to you. What motivates you? What's something that your legal institution has done to cultivate and embrace it?
Sure. And I apologize for the background noise. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but there seems to be a fire truck or something driving by.
Okay.
So for me, I think it's achieving a sense of fulfillment, right? It's different areas coming together really to give me a sense that I'm doing something that I can feel good about when I go home every day, right? And that's tough sometimes in the legal profession because we often have to argue points that we don't necessarily agree with, or it's not always everything that we want it to be. But I think really working with people that want to bring out the best in me, right? That gives me a sense of fulfillment. And my firm, they really do a fantastic job at helping us with this. It's the sense that, something about millennials, I say it like this, is we often feel a lot of pressure to give everybody else or prove to everybody else that we are competent, right? That we are not the me generation, as Professor Jackson called us, that we really can contribute a lot and that we're not a burden on society. So I think really emphasizing the role that we play in each case and how that's important to the outcome, and giving us a sense of feeling like when our contribution matters, right? That really, I've found for personally that on the cases where I'm part of the bigger case, and I can really see it through from beginning to end, and I can see how I've contributed to this wonderful outcome for our client, and I can see the happy look on our client's face when we tell them about it or when they're there to experience it, right? That gives me that sense of fulfillment that I really feel satisfies me at the end of the day.
Yeah, and those are all great points. Thank you guys for showing it and sharing those. And I'll say just briefly, I would say that greater inclusion in the work cohort, I kind of heard in all three of your presentations, and that's very important to me. Two notable things happened. We closed a big venture capital fund here, and as the junior associate, as you guys know, oftentimes your assignments are very project based. And then you look back over the course of 2 or 3 months and you're like, wow, I did do a lot of this. It felt like maybe it was a 4-hour assignment here or a 6-hour assignment there, but it contributed to this greater whole. And my firm did an excellent job of making me feel included. And another time, we did a fundraise for a client and they invited us over to the house, and my partner came and said, hey, you coming with me. And my mom actually got to go too. So my mom, if you're watching, but that was important. So that inclusion in that work cohort is intrinsic motivation. And the good thing for all the firms out there that care about the bottom line is free. So, good way to compensate someone without having to spend money. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask that we move to Professor Jackson's second part of her presentation, and I'm going to have some follow-up questions for you guys after that.
Thank you, panelists, for your insightful comments. Picking up where I left off in part one, discussing who they are and how they learn best, next I will discuss millennials in the workplace. I was honored to serve on the research project Building a Better Bar, Capturing Minimum Competence, published in 2020. The primary goal of the study was to gather data to address substantial gaps in our knowledge, build on the existing research, and develop an evidence-based definition of minimum competence. The objective was to develop and promote understanding of the minimum competence needed to practice law and to align the bar exam with research-based concepts of minimum competence. We hosted 50 focus groups in 12 states. 41 of the focus groups were with junior lawyers who were licensed between 2016 and 2019, and the remaining 9 focus groups were made up of supervisors of junior lawyers. We also hosted some specialized groups of new lawyers, comprised of only women, people of color, rural lawyers, and solo practitioners to ensure we gathered a well-rounded view of new lawyers' experiences. During the in-person focus groups, in addition to asking more detail about the knowledge and skills that new lawyers use during their first years of practice, we also explored how they obtained those competencies. Did they bring those competencies into the workplace, or did they require additional knowledge and skills, building more on those foundational competencies? Based on our first of its kind qualitative research and supported by past quantitative research, we concluded that the minimum competency consisted of 12 interlocking components or building blocks. The study we designed was intended to be shared with legal educators, accreditors, bar examiners, and also the legal profession. The study, which included the in-person interviews of junior lawyers, also provided experiences and expectations of these new lawyers. Here are a series of observations made by junior lawyers. A majority of the junior lawyers described the workplace where they assume substantial responsibility for client matters with little to no supervision. Some described the workplaces or workplace where they were thrown into the fire or dropped into the deep end. These new lawyers felt unprepared for this level of responsibility and worried about harming their clients. New lawyers generally appreciated these opportunities, but they voiced their discomfort at learning essential skills by taking on the responsibility of vulnerable clients. The perspective from supervisors is equally important. During the supervisor focus groups, the following observations were made by supervising attorneys who directly supervised junior lawyers. Again, junior lawyers that graduated and were barred between 2016 and 2019. Some supervisors acknowledged that their colleagues and themselves often lacked time to guide new lawyers. Supervisors also recognized that many of them lacked effective feedback skills. At the same time, several supervisors blamed new lawyers for being too delicate or failing to respond to feedback. In another group, a supervisor at a small firm admitted, "I take full responsibility. Sometimes I need to slow down long enough to teach new lawyers so that they can give me back what I want from them. I've got to invest the hours of my own time in order for them to be able to give back to me, which they normally want to do. But if I don't do that, that's on me." Another supervisor made a really important comment and suggestion. At his large firm, he held training sessions for his partners to learn how to give feedback, acknowledging that's one of the things that they didn't learn in law school about giving feedback. So what are some strategies? Suggestions for helping new lawyers were summarized in the book, The Millennial Lawyer by J.P. Box. J.P. Box is a millennial lawyer turned entrepreneur. In his book, J.P. Box proposed strategies for working with new lawyers, many of which, from my view, can serve to directly address many of the concerns expressed by junior lawyers in the IELTS study. Embrace the work-life balance, which is slightly different from the previous concept of work-life balance. Allow associates to make immediate contributions. Embrace your role as a mentor. It's important to acknowledge that a mentor is slightly different from a supervisor. While a supervisor is focused on the end result, a mentor is vested in the outcome of his or her mentee. Promote teamwork and collaboration. Inspire young attorneys with great experience, not the promise of pay. An important characteristic of millennials is that they view themselves as philanthropists. They want to give back. So embrace the notion of doing well by doing good as you inspire young attorneys in the workplace. Next, the panel will discuss what supervisors and colleagues can do to support millennial attorneys based on their experiences.
Perfect. All right. Well, I like this section of it, interestingly enough, because one of the things that I was actually telling my one of the owners of my firm when we went to lunch yesterday, I said I went on an OCR interview, and it was like this really nice firm, marble floors. And of course, me being pretty direct, the first question I asked was like, how do y'all get clients? Who's paying for all this stuff? and needless to say, I didn't get invited back for a second interview. But it's pretty interesting because the law school model really teaches you to think like a judge, right? And when you get out and you start practicing, to Zoila's point, it really is a practice. You have to learn how to get out here and do the work. And I believe, Brajesh, you raised it as well. So, we really do rely on our supervisors to help us learn the ropes and what's, fair game and what's not. But speaking of one thing that came up in there, we talked about the difference between work-life balance, which is a term that has been around for a while, but also this new notion of work-life blend. So what are your favorite ways that your firms or legal institutions have allowed you some crossover between activities that you enjoy in your personal and community life and that have become integrated into your work life? And Ian, we'll start with you for that one.
Sure. So especially now that I've got a few more years under my belt, I've found that the firms are really encouraging lawyers to go out into the community and get to know people and become a big part of it. I think that there's several things. One, we talked about a comfort level. I think that increases your happiness going to work and having, I know it's more blending now, but a balance. And also it's good for making contacts and for building your own practice, especially as you grow more experienced in the profession.
Perfect. And Brajesh, we'll move to you next. Let's talk about work-life blend and some ways that things you're passionate about have been brought in. And I just want to note that you're actively involved in the Diversity Inclusion Committee and the Social Media Committee for the City, County, and Local Government section of the Florida Bar. And you've been co-drafting with your partners a lot of helpful things there to scale that committee out, that section. So let's talk.
Yeah, so I do agree that work-life balance, it's blended now, especially with the pandemic and everyone or many people working remotely and in a hybrid type environment. I think my office personally has embraced flexibility. Specifically, for example, if you have a doctor's appointment or if you have an errand to run, you're free to go do it as long as you put in the time that you need to put in for the week and you're completing all your assignments. There's no complaints. If you need to work 10 to 7 one day versus 8 to 5, the office is open to that as long as we have a heads up on it. I think the younger attorneys especially embrace that flexibility and that autonomy. And at some point, I think the more senior attorneys have to embrace that and realize that that's just the way the world is evolving towards now. And you have to trust your younger employees, all employees, but specifically your younger ones, to allow them to work remotely, for example, trust them enough that they're going to get their work done and they're not going to goof off. until they give you a reason not to. And when they do, don't punish the whole office for their mishaps. So.
Perfect. And Zoila, let's go to you with that question. What's a way that your firm has embraced allowing you to have this work-life blend between things that are important for you socially and in the community? And before you answer, I do want to thank everyone's employer for allowing you to participate on this panel, because this is an excellent example of a way that firms can allow young attorneys to get out and get involved. So Zoila, to you.
Thank you. So one thing that I feel very fortunate about, right? My firm, McFarland, Ferguson, and McMullen, we are a more full service firm, right? And so going out into the community, I'm really able to incorporate my background and the things I'm currently interested in and turn those into networking opportunities to draw in clients that obviously benefits the firm. So I'm very, very fortunate that I have the opportunity to go do the things that I love, that I'm interested in, and even bring in elements of, even being an immigrant, right? Because we practice immigration law. And so I'm very involved in the immigrant community. So I'm very fortunate that I can blend my life in that way. One thing that I also am very passionate about is politics. And my firm is very involved in the political arena in town, not only in our Tampa firm, but also in our Clearwater office. So for me, that's something that has worked seamlessly in my time here to be able to incorporate sort of those two worlds of my professional life as well as my passions.
Perfect. So, one thing I've heard everyone kind of alike to different degrees is law firms being environments that, if you're a scientist, you can go in and research something and implement the scientific method, and you find out that, hey, this didn't work to solve X. Good, we can, cross off that path. But lawyers, we have clients that, despite our best disclaimers, we want to say, we're going to zealously represent you, we're going to be ethical, we're going to work hard, but we can't promise a result. But that doesn't stop the fact that in our profession, a lot of time, failure, or what's perceived as failure, gets punished pretty harshly. But in my experiences, learning from failure is also something that's really important. So for you guys, what are some processes that you've observed that have allowed your institutions to embrace failure and to learn from them and kind of improve the operations the next time a similar issue comes up? And Zoila, I'm going to go back to you with that one.
Sure, thank you. Something that I think is important is we're all just knowing that we're all going to make mistakes, especially at the beginning. There's just so much that we don't know, and that, unfortunately, law schools don't prepare us for in the practice of law, not even the very best, right? There's so much that we just have to learn through experience. And with experience comes failure from time to time. So I think it's important to have a mentor, right, at the firm that you're at. I am eternally grateful for Rebecca Johns at my firm. She has been an incredible mentor. I told her one night that, every new attorney should have a Rebecca Johns in their life. And, anytime that I feel like, oh man, I'm going to mess this up, or I actually did mess this up, she's someone that I can go to and say, okay, how do I approach this, right? How do I best approach this, rather? How do I fix it? And she's not a litigator, but just so to segue back to something that was said previously in the video, right? A lot of attorneys lack the time to mentor, and that's older attorneys, I should say. And so one thing that I've found is it doesn't have to be someone that does exactly what you do. It can be someone that does have a little bit more time or willingness to help mentor someone, and just say, okay, if you're struggling with something, if there's an issue, if you feel like you're failing at something, come talk to me and I'll help you try to figure that out. So, I can say that I have failed at times, and it just happens, it's inevitable. And being at this firm, I've never had an experience of someone putting me down for it. And the response has always been, it's okay, we'll fix it. This is how we fix it. Or, hey, go try to figure out how to fix this. But it's never been, you're incompetent, or I can't believe you did this, right? That's just not helpful at all. It doesn't accomplish anything, because at the end of the day, you want your younger attorneys to be as confident as they can be, right? To feel motivated to do a good job. And so when you start telling them that they're just not smart enough, or they're just not, like I said earlier, competent, right? That's just not helpful. And so for me, really getting the feedback of, okay, you did this wrong. Now for the future, right? You'll never do it wrong again, right? Once you do it wrong the first time. That's been incredibly helpful for me. The mentorship, and of course, just not being put down for mistakes, but rather being told, hey, let's work through this together to see how we can figure it out.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. And Ian, I want to go to you with that. Some ways that you kind of embrace failure as an innovation tactic that you've seen your institution. You got a wealth of experience. How's it worked out?
So it, just like Zoila said, it is unavoidable as a young attorney. There will be times either you don't win or you fail, and there are somewhat separate and distinct items. What I've found is that when I've struggled or failed, especially early in my career, it was oftentimes on the art of the law versus the mechanics of it. So the motion was filed timely. The jury instructions were submitted on time, but maybe they weren't as precise as they could have been. And having that opportunity for feedback, especially early on, from the partner levels or the people in charge of the litigation, has been incredibly invaluable in making sure, just like Zoila said, well, you're not going to do that again. And when you learn those skills, it's just so invaluable for progressing in a career. And harkening back to what we talked about earlier, making it a comfortable office to work in, a place that you love coming to every day, making the motivation to be better and to do the right thing. That's what's really exciting to me about the profession, and very fortunate to have had very similar experiences with Zoila, with great mentors over the course of my career.
Perfect, perfect. And Brajesh, I'm going to go to you next. And I know you've been in-house in the private sector, and you kind of done a lot of transactional work in addition to, serving as counsel to two local government. And I'm sure that in your gear shifting, you've had to kind of learn a lot of new information that wasn't previously known to you. And along the way, I'm sure you endured some failures, and you've also learned from them because you're a successful, very diligent attorney. Could you talk about how your legal institutions have, embraced failure as a learning mechanism and how it's helped you out?
Yeah, I'll just echo some of what Zoila said. With experience, as you put in more and more time, as you have more assignments, and as the complexity of the assignments grows, you're bound to make mistakes. It happens. But I think it's important, and I'll piggyback off what I said earlier. I think it's important for those in a management type position to recognize that you want to use those moments as teaching moments and provide questions to allow the attorney to think critically so that they don't make the same mistake twice. I think all those reasons have been key for me personally. And just, I guess, just having an open door environment, kind of segueing a little bit, but like just having an open environment where people feel comfortable before they even get to a point where they're going to make a mistake, that they feel comfortable enough to go to you, or to go have a brainstorming session, for example, with a group of people in the office to kind of talk through whatever it is that they're working through to kind of avoid that mistake. I think those things I've encountered in some of the places I've worked at, and it's been extremely helpful for me.
Perfect, perfect. And I just want to make one administrative note. If anyone in the audience has any questions, you can type them in the Zoom chat, and I'll go through them, and I'd be more than happy to ask a question, although we are going to be wrapping up here pretty soon. So I want to try and, just talk about a few more points before we go. I'm going to give you guys a chance to think about this question, but before you answer it, and you can take it in whatever order you want. But if you could give one golden nugget of advice to someone that is opening up their own solo and small firm and they want to hire a new associate, young associate, or another attorney, what's one piece of advice that you would give them that you think, can be their North Star, at least from your perspective, if you were joining that firm and your success and, giving them the type of deliverables that they want? So give you a second to think about it, and you can take it in whatever order you want.
I can go ahead. So something that I think is incredibly important to me, and I'm sure a lot of other people, younger attorneys, is to know that your employer, right, wants to reciprocate the loyalty that they expect from you, right? We are building our careers, right, through our jobs. It's not just a job, right? It's our careers that we're building. And so to know that your employer is fully invested in you as much as you are in them, I think builds long-lasting employment relationships that extend well beyond even the time of employment, right? It's a good source of referrals. It can turn into even a mentor, someone you go to for advice. So for me, definitely proving or showing your employee, your younger attorney, that you're invested in them as much as you want them to be invested in you, right? Because I think it's discouraging when you feel like, you're just replaceable. And we all are replaceable. But to feel like they really want to see you succeed, like they're invested in your future, that's incredibly important and motivating for them to do a good job and frankly, to just want to work well and stay there in the long run.
Perfect. Who next?
I can go. I would say the one piece of advice I could give is, there's probably a list, but one piece would be to embrace work life, allow the newer attorney to, be open to their schedule. If they need to work remotely, allow them to do it. I think allowing the flexibility for newer attorneys, younger attorneys, I think that will allow them to be happier with where they're at. I think it'll prove to be more productive, the work that you'll be getting from them. And so I would say embracing the work-life balance.
Perfect. Ian.
Oh, Rajesh just took mine, but one thing that stuck with me is an old partner I used to work for told me that when she was looking to hire attorneys, she looked for two qualities: hard work and integrity, because those are the only things that you can't teach. Eventually, if you do this long enough, you'll learn the motion to dismiss standard. You'll learn how to pick a jury. You'll learn all of the other soft skills of the profession and the hard ones too. But you want somebody that is going to try to do right by the client and do their very best.
Perfect. And we do have one question from the audience that I found particularly insightful. We've spoken a lot about what firms can do to make environments conducive to newer attorneys producing top results back to the firm. So we talk about the reciprocal effects of the firm kind of starting the relationship off on a good foot and then getting back good results from the attorney. However, for newer attorneys, what are some things that you think they can kind of teach senior attorneys when they join these institutions? Because one of the benefits of bringing in new blood and new folks is they're able to share some insights on what they may have learned in law school that wasn't being taught before, or new developments in just technology, or just some emotional intelligence and people skills that might be particularly housed with new associates. So can you guys share some skills that more senior attorneys can learn from millennial attorneys? And I will start with you, Brajesh.
So I would say embracing technology. I think that's across the minds of all many young attorneys. I can give you a real life example. My current place of employment, the Seminole County Attorney's Office, we're all primarily, I don't want to say all, but a large part paper-based. So I know I've worked in a previous county attorney's office before where many things have been digital. So now I'm trying to bring that same train of thought and that same process here so that we can be more efficient. And it's difficult because you have people that have been working here for years and years who have been accustomed to a certain way. But I think just being open to new ideas, especially when it comes to technology, things that younger attorneys have either heard of or have had experience with, I think that would be one big piece of advice.
Perfect. That's interesting. And helping your firm innovate is very important. Ian, we'll go to you next.
It's a tough question. I think technology is the obvious one. Just like Brajesh said, I started my career off at a place that still had paper files, and that's how you still did discovery. You turned it over in the courtroom. It just makes life a lot easier, and I think that's something that can be embraced just to save on maybe the grind of the hours, especially in discovery.
Perfect. Zoila, we're going to end this question with you.
Sure. Of course, I have to echo what you both have said, and that technology is an obvious choice, because even just through Westlaw or LexisNexis, we use Westlaw. But there's so much that I think younger attorneys know how to do with those search engines that older attorneys just don't. And even with putting a document in there and having Westlaw, be a backstop to check that the case law cited in there is still good law, things like that. I think a lot of older partners don't know about the benefits of having a newer attorney teach you some of that. I've had many attorneys come to me in the firm and ask me, hey, can you teach me about that thing you were talking about the other day? Or even with Zoom, right? When we had to switch over to Zoom, my firm definitely used me as a resource to train both the attorneys and the staff on Zoom and Zoom meetings, and some of our attorneys serve as mediators as well. And so that was definitely one area that I saw it in practice, where the attorneys here turned to me and were like, hey, this is where we're going to use your expertise, things that we're not familiar with. And I think it worked out to everyone's benefit.
Perfect. And I think that's an interesting point that so many of you touched on technology, because it may be an avenue for new attorneys to take on some leadership roles within their firms, serving as technology liaisons or managers, so that, we can kind of streamline some of these practices, because it no longer is something that is kind of like a plus or addition. It's mandatory now, especially I think COVID showed us that. Although I will say in my firm, it's kind of the opposite. My managing partner in my practice group is excellent with technology, and I'm not as good with it. So just one tidbit about, how we all have different experiences. With that, I am going to close out this discussion. And I just want to say thank you to all of your firms for allowing you to be here. Thank you to my firm for allowing me to take some time away to moderate this discussion. Thanks to the solo and small firm section and Jacina Parson for allowing us to get this done. Thanks to Magistrate Griffin for her support. And I think the one thing I heard that we can take away is that, young millennial attorneys want to be an integral part of the firms that they're at. They kind of have to get their sea legs to a bit when they get started. But once they get wind under their wings, they can be really big assets to any firm. So that is my big takeaway, and I hope that everyone who's in attendance learned from it as well. And thank you to all the panelists for joining. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Righty then.
Thank you, everybody. And that's going to conclude today's Wednesday Wisdom. Great job to the panel, and everybody have a great rest of your day.
Bye.